Okay guys, so here is the second PowerPoint audio and video presentation about Chala, this African novel, focusing on interpretations of Chala, and this will be relatively brief. There's not been a lot written about Chala, and it's a very short novel, but I have some ideas, and I have found some ideas about interpreting Chala. And so there you see another still image from the film version of Chala, and on the left you have El Hadji's first wife wearing traditional African, Islamic African clothing, and then you see El Hadji wearing, I don't know if that's a tuxedo or a suit. He's got a white bow tie, and on the excuse me, on the right you see another woman. And it's been a while since I watched the film, so I don't remember which character that is, but I believe this takes place at the wedding. And of course the woman on the right is quite a contrast with the woman on the left in terms of her appearance and her modernity, right? And that's a central conflict of the novel, like we talked about last time, between traditional African culture and Western influences. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting image, emblematic of the conflict in the novel. Some general interpretations of the novel, and then the next slide will be about interpreting some particular aspects of the novel. And so, as I said last time, the novel has been looked at and considered to be an example of social realism. And we've talked about that twice before, about realism that comments on social conditions, that's generally sympathetic to socialism, to the proletariat or working class, sympathetic to the impoverished, and hostile to wealth and government. I think it's fair to say that the narrator of Chala shows some hostility to the main character, who is wealthy and a member of the Chamber of Commerce and so on. A scholar named Gloria Onyoziri has written, I think this quote from one of her articles gives a good overall view of the novel. She says, Chala, published in 1973 after the early optimism of the independence era, had given way... I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the right inflection there. Published in 1973 after the early optimism of the independence era had given way to the disillusionment and disappointment of the 1970s, the novel does, reflects the general impression characteristic of this period that the newly empowered Dakar and implicitly African bourgeoisie was essentially a self-serving, unfruitful minority opposed to progress. And you see the end of her quote there. And so, of course, you know, El Hadji represents that bourgeois class, that middle class, and represents a self-serving, unfruitful minority opposed to progress. She also says, in Chala, a narrative of both personal and social history, a handful of unscrupulous upstarts tries to exercise such control, disinheriting, exploiting, and alienating the rest of their people. And if you think about how the novel ends and the sort of secret that's revealed at the end, it makes sense. It's the story of a man who has disinherited, exploited, and alienated his people. She quotes another writer named Bernth Linfors, and I think this quote again gives a nice overall interpretation of the novel. El Hadji's sexual impairment operates metonymically to signify a much larger systemic malfunction in a political economy of post-colonial Africa. That is, a part represents the wholesale public emasculation of Africa's petite bourgeoisie, who are seen as a sterile class of corrupt, parasitic entrepreneurs incapable of engaging in productive activities. He also says ultimately, the transformations affecting Al-Haji and the beggar translate into a chiasmic figure, impotent power and powerful impotence. Al-Haji and the beggar, one is powerful yet impotent, and one is an image of impotent power, and that would be Al-Haji, and one is an image of powerful impotence, and that would be the beggar. The beggar has power over Al-Haji. Al-Haji is, on the other hand, is prosperous and a member of the Chamber of Commerce and so on. Some particular aspects and episodes and characters that can be interpreted in certain ways, or that have been. I think I already talked about in the last PowerPoint about the kora player, this musician playing a traditional African stringed instrument at the wedding and having to be heard only between the songs performed by a modern amplified band, wedding band. And that's page 17 if you'd like to look at that again. And by the way, if you Google kora and do some digging, you can find a picture of that instrument. Same with silk cotton tree, which we'll talk about in a minute. Let's see. Okay, so the same writer, Onye Oziri, that I quoted earlier, has written about the silk cotton tree as a symbol. And I'm not quite following the order of the slide here, I guess. But anyway, this somewhat lengthy quote from Onye Oziri gives a good overview of her sort of theory about what the silk cotton tree symbolizes. On page 47, the silk cotton tree is just a brief image. I believe Al-Haji is compared to a silk cotton tree sinking into the mud. And so she says, quote, Al-Haji is at one and the same time elevated by the comparison with the silk cotton tree, a cultural symbol of majesty and strength, and isolated and denounced, since the silk cotton tree is stuck in the mire, which connotes stagnation and putrefaction, not to mention that a tree trunk sinking into soft mud might suggest a flagging erection. This figurative representation of the socioeconomic upstart, Al-Haji, emphasizes the unstable foundations of his world, the corrupt collectivity he thinks he belongs to, and the decay, deficiency, and stagnation that characterize his economic empire. And so this writer, as an African herself, has a deeper understanding of the symbolism of this silk cotton tree. As she says in the quote, it's a cultural symbol of majesty and strength, and it's depicted sinking into the mud. A writer named Thomas J. Lynn has written about the character of the beggar and his role as a trickster. Trickster figures are common in a lot of cultures, in Native American cultures and in African cultures, and in Chinese culture. If you think about Monkey, he's certainly a trickster, and as I say more about what this guy said about trickster, you'll recognize he could just as easily be talking about Monkey as the beggar. So Thomas J. Lynn, he pointed out one thing, in that in the novel the past is equivocal, the present is deplorable, and the future is contested. The future is sort of up for grabs. And he says about the beggar, he says, quote, the beggar, like trickster figures in general, jars the routine thoughts and actions of those he encounters and shakes up the conventional order of society. He could be talking about Monkey there, right? If you remember the havoc Monkey brought to the various celestial environments of the Buddhists and Taoists and so on, and the way he shook things up and jarred people out of routines and so on. Continuing with Thomas J. Lynn, what he says about the beggar, he mocks and tricks Al-Haji into self-knowledge, however meager that self-knowledge may be. Of tricksters, he says further, tricksters disrupt the complacency and arbitrary advantages of the powerful in a way that benefits the larger community. Again, I can't help thinking of monkey, but we're talking about the beggar here. They routinely offend the sensibilities of courteous society and challenge the norms that permit social injustice to be construed as an inescapable component of modern life. Their tricks or transgressions manage to bring competing cultural interests into some form of productive relationship. He points out that the beggar's singing, the singing by the beggar, has a magical effect, just like the African folk trickster Tortoise. That's a folk figure of African culture called Tortoise that has magical singing. Hermes in Greek mythology, the effect of his singing is magical, and he doesn't mention sirens from the Odyssey, but I would think that would be another example, as would Jigglypuff. He says, quote, "On the other hand, what Khala's beggar may exercise in relation to El Hadji is psychological acumen rather than occult skill." In other words, he may realize that El Hadji is anxious over the expense of his new marriage. He may realize El Hadji has a sense of stage fright since the consummation of his marriage is so public. Remember that scene? He says the beggar/trickster's role is to preserve cultural memory. In this case, the lore of El Hadji's betrayal of his clan. Right? He has preserved that cultural memory of El Hadji's betrayal of his own clan. And this is cultural memory that neo-colonialists like El Hadji would rather forget. And I have the word pilgrimage up there, and I don't really have notes on pilgrimage, but of course pilgrimage plays an important role in Khala. El Hadji means he who has made a pilgrimage, who has done the Hajj. We talked last week, I talked in the previous PowerPoint about Islamic pilgrimage. Okay, and so that is about it for interpretations of Khala. So I'll say over and out.